Welcome everybody to Becoming a Model LGBTQ+ School for Administrators. I'm Rob Darrow with the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. As I mentioned earlier, the link to all these resources that I'm going to be talking about in the process that we're going to be engaged in today and between now and February are listed on that document as well. So I want to welcome everybody. Just by way of quick introduction of myself, I work as an educational consultant around LGBTQ+ topics. I also teach in the credential program at CSU Monterey Bay. Every elementary and secondary history teacher goes through my course at some point. So it's been great meeting all the future teachers in our area. I grew up in Santa Cruz, am trained and educated in the Santa Cruz City Schools, Branson 40 de la Vega, Branson 40 Middle School, and Harbor High. And I've taught every grade level, preschool through doctoral level professors at some point. And I identify as a gay cisgender man. As many of you know, I share this in many groups that I realized in my 50s I was gay. So I came out later in life, felt like I was the only person like that. And since then I've met lots of people that realized who you are later in life. So I want to make sure that you know that this is a safe space. The pink triangle represents the symbol that was worn by people in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. The gay men wore this symbol. The LGBTQ+ community reclaimed this, and it's now a symbol of safety for people that they know that. Just having some sort of safe space symbol like this sends an important message to your students and to your families. So our outcomes today are that you'll learn what the components are for being a model LGBTQ+ school. You'll increase your personal and professional cultural proficiency. You'll learn about these different systems and decide which of these systems you're going to focus on. And you will identify your planned actions. In other words, what are you going to do with this information between now and February? And what actions are you going to take? And let me just also add that I am watching the chat, so if there's questions or comments, you're welcome to type them there. So I want to tell you that the ultimate goal here is that Santa Cruz County will be a model of inclusivity for LGBTQ+ students and their families and the entire community. And I say that because this is the history I know about Santa Cruz. In 1975 was the first Pride. We had one of the first gay mayors anywhere in the United States. Santa Cruz County was the first county in the state, probably the nation, to have a non-discrimination employment ordinance based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We have a diversity center within our community. We have many schools that have LGBTQ+ student clubs. You may not know this, but in 1997, the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County established the Diversity Fund, and people throughout Santa Cruz County raised $1 million to put in that account. In 2021, we had 2 LGBTQ+ mayors, one in Watsonville, Jimmy Dutra, and one in Santa Cruz, Donna Myers. We have the Queer Youth Leadership Awards, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And we are establishing the model LGBTQ+ school program in Santa Cruz County today, based on all of your input. So that's all the history. And as I have spent time over the last 6 years looking at LGBTQ+ topics across the United States, across California, and across the various counties, there is no county like Santa Cruz County. Or let me put it this way, very few. I've not found another inclusive, welcoming community as Santa Cruz County, including all of our schools. And the fact that you are all here today says a whole lot towards that broader goal. So we're all in this journey together. No one of us can do it by ourselves, but together we continue to make history. And what ultimately you all came here for is how to best support the LGBTQ+ students and families in your schools and in your school districts. So here's my expectations. is that you will each take something from this workshop today and apply it. Now, each person here individually needs to do something with this information. If you're the principal of a school or a vice principal, you can't delegate this to somebody else. You have to do it. So whether you're the vice principal or a counselor or a school librarian or whatever your role is, you've got to think about what I'm going to apply from this workshop beyond what I'm already doing. And that I expect that you'll keep notes on what you do or what you did, and that you'll come back in February 28th, to celebrate and share the outcomes and learning with others. Related to all this, I just want to point out that the California Healthy Kids Survey is being administered in our schools in October or early November. It is the only statewide survey that includes LGBTQ plus students. So if you're, especially at middle school and high school, please reach out and find who's administering that and encourage your students to complete it honestly. I'll show you some of that data later, but it's really, the California Healthy Kids Survey is really important. And if you find your district's not doing it, then it's something to think about for the future. Now, that does not include elementary schools because that's a little different related to this survey, but I just wanted to bring that forward. You all have homework. I'm telling you your homework up front, and I'll tell you it at the very end as well. Your homework is to develop a school plan. When I say a school plan, figure out 1 to 3 actions you're going to take. There's no way you can do all of this over the next 4 or 5 months. You got to start somewhere. And some of you have already started. You've already got stuff going. Everybody here is on our same journey. We're in different places along the journey. So you want to develop your school plan. What that looks like is that document that's on the agenda. You're going to review what we call the LGBTQ plus school index, which I'm going to talk about later, to determine your focus. Now, let me just say that just doing the LGBTQ plus index is not enough. You've got to do something with that information if you choose to do it. You don't have to do it. You can choose to do it, but that document has all of the elements that you need in place to become a model LGBTQ plus school. You're going to identify 1 to 3 new actions. I would strongly encourage that you meet with the LGBTQ plus students at your club or your school, and that you do an inventory of the library books at your school to see how many are LGBTQ plus and how many of the top 40 LGBTQ plus books that we identified through the Santa Cruz County Office of Education in June are on your list and in your library. So those are that's the main homework, and anything else you want to add to this, you can certainly add on to it, but that's what your homework is. So during this workshop, again, in each one of your schools, you click on that document, you've got a form that looks like this: what we already do, what we know now, and what we can work on. So as a group, whichever school you're at, I'm expecting that hopefully you've started to fill in some of this already, what you already do. And then as you hear me talk about different pieces you go, oh, that's a great idea, or oh, I didn't know that. Then you add that to what we now know. And then a little bit later, when you break into your groups, what you can work on now, you will add to that. And then that will become your 1 to 3 items that you're going to work on. Now, you might end up with a list of 7 or 8 things there, but I want you to narrow it down into what I would consider bite-sized pieces, something you can actually do between now and February. So that's the overall plan. On that document, you have this personal and professional proficiency and the LGBTQ plus school index to click on. When you click on it, it's going to force you to make a copy. So when you make your copy, make sure you put it into your own Google Drive somewhere. And if you don't know what I just said there, find somebody who's techie from your school that knows what that is and have them do it for you. Because both of those are important assessments that we've developed over the years that you may find helpful. Could somebody, one of my co-hosts, would you put the link to the agenda in the chat so the people who just joined us can click on that? Thanks. Again, all of these items I'm referring to are listed on the agenda that somebody's going to put in the chat real soon here. So what are the components of an LGBTQ plus school. So I've worked on this for at least the last 6 years, trying to figure out what this components look like. I've looked around throughout the state of California to find a model LGBTQ plus school. And I can tell you, there is not one school that is any better or any worse than any of our schools in Santa Cruz County. Because I've looked, I keep looking all the time, and I don't find one. Now, some of them may teach LGBTQ history, some of them may participate in safe schools through the LA LGBTQ centers, some of them may have books in their libraries, but nobody has a coordinated approach, and nobody has a school where we could all go visit and say, that's what it looks like. So these are the things that need to be in place. And again, you can't do all of this in the next 4 or 5 months, but you can begin thinking about, which parts of these can I start working on? So to be a model LGBTQ plus school, there's got to be some sort of ongoing conversation about LGBTQ plus students. It can't just be your GSA advisor and the kids that show up to that meeting once a week or every other week. It's got to be throughout the whole staff. We estimate there are roughly 10% of people that identify themselves as LGBTQ plus people and students. So that means in any group of 30 students in a classroom, 3 fit that category or are thinking about it. So you want to think about these integrated systems, about school climate, curriculum, data, and professional learning. You want to make sure that LGBTQ plus topics appear in important school reports like the LCAP, your school plans, the SARC, all those, all those reports you do every year. Go back and look and see, is there anything about LGBTQ plus in those? And if not, then that's a place to start. Are there LGBTQ plus topics in your school documents, like your faculty handbook or student handbook, or any documents you hand out at your school or on your website? And does everybody at your school have what I call a cultural proficiency mindset, that mindset of continuous improvement to meet the needs of all school stakeholders? And then do you have school procedures in place when a kid walks by and says, "That's so gay"? Does every staff member in your school know what to do with that and how to respond to it? And do you have LGBTQ plus integrated lessons throughout the curriculum, regardless of the grade level? And finally, do you have an active LGBTQ plus club at your school? Now, again, let me just say that this varies from kindergarten through high school. And I know I've got people on here from elementary, middle, and high school. And some of these apply, well, let me just say that for you high school people and middle school, all of this applies to all of you. The elementary school people, some pieces of this would be in modified form. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But that's why you're going to create your school plan that works best for you. So I want to start or continue to ask you what your identity is. I'm going to ask you to type this in the chat. Don't type it yet. If somebody walked up to you and said, "What's your identity?" or "Who are you?" what 2 or 3 words would describe who you are? And I want you to type the very top word you're thinking of right now in the chat. And when I say go, we're all going to hit enter and see what everybody puts in there. All right, 1, 2, 3, go. So as I look down this, oh, wow, what an interesting split. Yeah, there's gender and our role, although I do see exhausted. Yeah, it's that time of year for sure.
You said the top one, Rob. So I just
top one. Yeah, right on the top one. So it's interesting when we think about people's identities. These are the lens of differences that differentiates people. For LGBTQ plus students and their families, their gender and sexual orientation is usually at the top of their list because it shows up to them every day that they go to school in some way, shape, or form. it's not that they want it to, it's just that it is. And so understanding that it's one of those things that separates people, but also joins us, as well as all these other topics like income and values and family status and background, or all those other pieces. It's just important to realize that we all have different identities to prove. I like this cultural iceberg because it shows us kind of at the top, the stuff that's mostly visible. Although when they made this, they put gender at the top, and I'm not sure that gender is as visible now as it was 10 years ago when this chart was made, or whatever years it was. But it tells you, that to understand these other pieces that are not so visible, the only way you can learn about other people is to talk to them and to meet them and to figure out ways to get to know them better. And so that works across the board with all students. There's also this thing called implicit bias, which hopefully most of you've heard about, but it's the attitudes or stereotypes that we all grew up with, right? In our families, in our schools, in the churches we attended, we all have these feelings and attitudes about other people based on things like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and appearance. We all have it. No matter what we do, we have it. And one way I identify my implicit bias is that when I feel myself getting really irritated at another person, I realize that's my implicit bias coming out, because they're not operating the way I expect them to, which is partly the way I grew up thinking that things should be a certain way, that people should act a certain way. So we all have this implicit bias. Knowing about it is helpful as we think about what and how we identify and work with our LGBTQ plus students and our families. And again, just to remind all of us, culture is any group of people with shared history, values, and patterns of behavior. And proficiency is the mindset that we continually need to learn about it. We need to learn about ourselves, and we need to learn about other people. We all belong to many cultures, right? We've got our family culture, we've got our school culture. If you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, that's a culture. If you're African American or Asian or Latinx, those are other cultures that may be important in your lives. If you go to a church, that's another culture. We all have many cultures, and part of our job as educators is to realize that learning about cultures never ends. It's always continuous. Now, I'm like many of you educators. When I became a teacher, I thought, just tell me what I'm supposed to know and I'll check it off and I've got it. Yeah, well, cultural proficiency is not like that. It took me quite a few years to realize that I couldn't learn everything there is to know. And that relates back to what a culturally proficient leader or a leader of equity looks like, right? So if you're those kinds of people, which I think you're all here because you're here for this workshop today, is that you take responsibility for your own learning, you understand equity, you create the conditions and spaces for yourself and for others to have continuous improvement. You understand that being culturally proficient is continuous learning about everything, including the LGBTQ plus culture, and that you lead through a variety of different ways to create those spaces. And again, it's not something you can do every day or all the time, but to think about it. Now, one of the assessments that's on your school plan is what I call the LGBTQ plus cultural proficiency assessment. And many of us who've worked in schools for many years finally thought, let's just write down what we think everybody should know. So that's what that document is. Within that document, there's the personal piece, which means you have grown up knowing and learning about. There's the professional piece, which means within education, within your classroom, within your PLC, or within your administrative team, what you discuss and how you interact with each other. And then there's this institutional piece, which, that's for people who have control over your school or district policies, and how they make sure that equity and support for all students is a cornerstone of that is really a policy. We all have lots of control over our personal proficiency, for sure. We have some control over our professional proficiency. We have limited control over our institutional thinking. But if you take that assessment, you'll see what I mean. Those are the key things that you can identify for yourself. And it's also a tool you can use in your school as well. I happen to think this is one way to get the conversation going at your school. is by thinking in these terms. The other thing just to know is that few of us have studied LGBTQ plus topics or history. Maybe some of you in your college programs took a class on gender. That's the only way you would do it, because the last time I checked, administrative or credential programs, doctoral programs, teacher induction, college history courses, few places talk about the LGBTQ plus culture in general, or how to study it, or how to understand it. Some of us who are part of the community, some of us who may have somebody in our family who's part of the LGBTQ plus community have a better understanding because they've had hands-on eyewitness experience, right? So that's how some of that has happened. The other challenge for all of us is that students are coming out younger, right? Younger and younger, and they embrace this thing called gender fluidity, which most of us didn't grow up knowing about. The other thing to know is that data is pretty consistent. This is from 2018, but there's new reports that just came out today that show the same thing, that, you know, about 2/3 of LGBTQ students don't feel safe at their schools or have felt harassed. And again, I mentioned that Santa Cruz County Chicks California Healthy Kids Survey this month. Again, I'll show you some data from that you can use in your school if you decide data is what you want to focus on as far as your plan. The other thing to know is that we are the only state with all of these laws, which, as I said to you earlier, thinking we were one of the few counties that's most inclusive of any place in the United States. Well, I also know that because we're the only state that has all of these laws. There are only 5 or 6 states that really encourage states to teach LGBTQ history in the curriculum. So that narrows down the number of communities pretty quickly. But it's important for you to know that these are the laws. And one of the documents on your resources under the school climate section lists all those laws and shows you the corresponding policy numbers in each one of your school districts. So if one of the things you want to do as an outgrowth of this is to go look at your policies, you could certainly do that. Again, I know you can't do it all. I'm just giving you a taste of different opportunities and ways to look at the issue for yourself and in your school and in your classroom. Here's the final challenge, is that for your school staff and teachers, everybody who works at your school, to become proficient, they got to know all this stuff. And to know all this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It takes an intentional approach over time. Everybody in your school should know what your common message and belief is about equity. Most administrators are the ones that need to know about those policies and practices and procedures. Everybody should really know a little bit about gender, sexual orientation, and social emotional learning and how that fits together. How to be proactive about LGBTQ plus issues of bullying or anti-gay slurs or transgender students are all important pieces. And then the content knowledge about the teaching part, that's going to be different, teacher specific. Obviously for teachers who are teaching health, their knowledge is more important than teachers teaching other things. So these are all the different areas to learn about. And just to touch on a little LGBTQ plus history, in addition to the history I already shared with you, is these are the years that these terms came into being. And so, but these are the terms we generally use. And just know that nationally, there's a national organization that tells news outlets what the acronym is each year. And the current acronym that people use across the nation, and if you hear any news story, you'll hear them use LGBTQ, is generally the acronym people use. And LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQ plus is just fine. Different entities across Santa Cruz County will add other letters to it, which is just fine. But just understand that whatever acronym you're comfortable with, use it and use it over and over so you become comfortable with it. I can tell you from experience that when I hear a speaker and they stumble over these letters, I know that they don't really understand the topic very well. I know that's not true for most of us across Santa Cruz County. That speaker was somebody in a different county, but It's one indicator of what people know. And then finally, I just want everybody to know that there's always been same-sex love in every culture in history. And again, we didn't learn that because nobody talked about it, but in ancient Greece, Native American tribes, many other ancient cultures, there are examples of same-sex love. This guy, Magnus Hirschfeld, in 1919 in Germany started to document a lot of this work, but because of the Nazi regime burning his building down, it didn't develop quite the way it could. In 1976, this guy, Jonathan Tatz, wrote the book called Gay American History. And that's when the LGBTQ plus history really got written down. Finally, you know, it takes somebody who's a historian to do that work. So just know that LGBTQ plus history is alongside African American history, Latinx history, women's studies, and that at the university level, they determined it's called queer history or queer studies. So that's where those terms come from. I'm going to shift into the systemic approach. And then in just a few minutes, I'm going to break you into your smaller school groups to start working on your plan. So there are 4 different ways to systematically look at LGBTQ plus students. And of course, it's not just LGBTQ plus students. You can use this same piece for any group of students in your school. But what I do know and what I have seen is when you start focusing on LGBTQ plus students in your school, then it crosses over to all different groups of students in your school as well. Because LGBTQ plus students are also in other groups, in other cultural groups, like being African American or Latinx or white or any other group. And when you start meeting the needs of LGBTQ plus students, you're meeting the needs of all the students in your school. So there are 4 main areas that we talk about as far as the systemic approach: climate, data, curriculum, and professional learning. And again, let me say to all of you, you can't do all of this. You may have started some of this, like I know there are teachers here who teach US history that have been integrating LGBTQ plus history for the last 3 years. So you can't, that's not a new action for you. You got to come up with a new one. But for most of us here, wherever you're going to start and develop that one area. And hopefully you're thinking about that as I'm going through this. So this first systemic approach is climate. And I always put school climate first. You know, for those of you that look at the state dashboard of schools, there's a school climate category there, but it's really not very well developed. And again, for whatever reason, it's not. So we're going to lead from Santa Cruz County and move forward as far as school climate and LGBTQ plus students. So in the school climate area, and if you, again, you look on the agenda, I'll show you the agenda in just a second so you visually see it as well, but there's a link to the personal professional proficiency assessment I've talked about, the school climate index, which are both linked on your individual school plan pages. When you think about climate, think about the printed material, the outward facing documents you have at your school, your website, the things you communicate. At a district level, it'd be things like board workshops, policies, and procedures. I do know in Santa Cruz City Schools and Paro Valley Unified City, School District, there's annual report about LGBTQ plus affairs at the school board level. Those types of things are all part of the broader school climate. Again, these tools are on your document. There's a document there called Starting the Conversation. Again, that may help you to identify where and how you want to start the conversation. There's also a link to the Santa Cruz County Office of Education website. The resource list we put together there, we did that through our Santa Cruz County LGBTQ plus task force. And most of our school districts have taken that document and made it their own so that regardless of what school district our students are in, they've got the same list of resources. So all those links are there for you. So this school climate index was developed about 4 years ago, and a couple of people who were here actually helped develop this. This was developed based on those laws that I showed you earlier, based on the laws and policies that are in place in most of our school districts across Santa Cruz County. So our group came together to look at these documents, or to create this document. And the document is created in Google Sheets and in Excel. And again, once you get into your school planning group, you'll click on that link, make a copy for yourself. If you all want your own separate copy, you can have your own separate copies. But what this will do is you don't necessarily have to fill this out, but it will give you the types of ideas to think about of what those 2 or 3 actions you can take between now and February. And you can look through it and check off the things that you feel like you're already making progress towards. So that's the main purpose of this. We wanted one document that provided all of that for you. So in this document, these are the 6 areas of the document. So there's 6 different tabs on like an Excel document. There's a data tab, the student support tab, the policies and communication tab, curriculum inclusion, professional learning, and then one specifically for counselors and health professionals. And that one really applies more to middle school and high school. You should notice that these topics are similar to those topics I shared earlier. So for all of you, again, as you look at these different topics, you can't do it all. So you want to pick the parts of this that are going to work best for you as you move things forward. So in just a second, I'm going to break you into your smaller groups. And I want you to begin to think about what areas you're going to work on. Which of these systematic approaches are you going to take, or is there something different? And what you're going to do between now and February 23rd. I'm going to click out of my slides. And again, I want to refer back to this document that I'm using before I pause the recording. So the link to this is on the slides. It's also in the chat. If I scroll down below here, all the resources and documents that I've talked about are all listed here by the different type of systemic approach. So you can see here the climate pieces, the data, the curriculum, the professional learning, all pieces that many of us have worked on developing over the last 5 or 6 years. There's other stuff here too. So more lesson plans, literature lists, and lots of other good stuff. So when you're ready to explore other pieces, they're all there. The other thing I'd say down here on this list are things like podcasts. So if you want to increase your knowledge about LGBTQ history, there's some great Making Gay History podcasts or things that for you. But what you're going to do now, and I opened up Branson 40 Middle School already. So on this document, when I put you in this group, I would say take 5 minutes to do the first 2 columns and take 10 minutes to do that last column. What can we work on? And just make a whole, brainstorm list of everything that's there. You may not get to, oh, we're going to focus specifically on this today, but at least get the list. I think we can all agree in education, having a list, having something to go from is always a good idea. So my expectation is that you will fill this out as I give you the time. And again, if some of you have to leave early, know that these all the resources are here. And when we come back in February, then I'll have you share off of those documents as we go from there. I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute and see if there's any questions. In the chat is the link to the agenda. Everything that I'm covering, including the link to the slides, are there. So you could repurpose the slides if you want. If you want to look at other pieces, you can do that. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at your school document. There's about 3 people who don't have a number in front of their name. if you could quickly